occupies. Here in the French countryside lay the remnants of a World War I concrete bunker. Less than 120 kilometers north of Paris, this structure was once part of a 250-mile trench and bunker complex, comprising the famed Western Front. Today, the bunker's rusting steel reinforcing rods protrude from the crumbling concrete shell, as it marks the boundary between a bean patch and a field of wheat. During the war, machine gunners inside these bunkers were blinded by smoke and deafened by the sound of their weapons reverberating off the bare walls. But being inside the bunker was far preferable to being outside. Firing through slits, known as embrasures, bunker gunners took a terrible toll in Allied lives. So hated were the machine gunners that upon surrendering, they were often executed by vengeful soldiers. Still, the bunkers were remarkably successful.
One of the reasons that the bunker concept really took hold was the realization that the old-fashioned fort was really a case of putting all of your eggs in one basket. A fort was considered to be a target, and damage to one portion could potentially damage another portion. So you wanted to disperse your defense as much as possible, and that led to putting everything in isolated bunkers.
France and Germany each suffered nearly 1.5 million casualties in the Great War. The catastrophic losses prompted both countries to create bunker and defensive line fortifications on an unprecedented scale. The French began construction on the Maginot Line in 1929, a 200-mile defensive barrier that they believed would keep Germany at bay. Stretching over much of the northern and eastern borders of France and incorporating many natural barriers, the mammoth structure may be the greatest bunker complex ever built.
The Maginot Line used the theory of a thin, tough skin. A very narrow but very strong line of fortifications that was designed to repulse the enemy.
The fortification consisted of a line of strong, mutually supporting, completely self-sufficient bunkers. Armed with machine guns and anti-tank weapons, much of the line bristled with artillery. Some of the structures were connected via tunnel to a subterranean support complex containing a command post, living quarters, storage facilities, and power plant. In short, everything necessary to make them fully independent. The largest structures within the line utilized integrated rail systems to move men and ammunition. Taken as a whole, the Maginot Line was a formidable obstacle to any hostile advance. But it would not fulfill the French desire to keep the Germans out. In 1940, soon after the outbreak of World War II, Hitler's forces completely circumvented the Maginot Line by first invading Luxembourg and Belgium to the north, and then descending into France.
Between the wars, the Germans in particular developed a new approach to warfare. They'd seen what happened in trench warfare, and they didn't want to repeat it. And they looked at ways to avoid repeating that. The French, on the other hand, were basically still ready to fight the First World War. They weren't prepared for what the Germans did, and when the Germans went round the Maginot Line, they had no counter.
After overrunning most of France, the Germans circled back to finally take on the Maginot Line. But even when attacked from behind, the French fortifications were exceptionally difficult to destroy. The Germans unleashed heavy artillery fired from a distance, but bringing forward special guns and zeroing in on the target took precious time. For the lightning-fast German war machine, the best offense against bunkers was infantry soldiers. The many different types of bunkers in the Maginot Line meant that no one textbook maneuver worked. Most plans involved first blinding the bunkers with flamethrowers, then moving in close to plant an explosive device known as a satchel charge. Although the bunkers were clearly vulnerable, they had proven their effectiveness. So much so that while the Germans fought to crush the remaining Maginot bunkers, they also built similar concrete structures on the western seaboard of France to protect their newly conquered territory. But like the bunkers of the Maginot Line, the German fortifications would prolong the battle, but ultimately lose the war. Next, the weapons of the Second World War force engineers to construct some of the greatest bunkers ever built. German submarines were the bane of Allied ships during the Second World War. Patrolling the waters of the North Atlantic, the submarines stopped American supplies and troops from reaching European ports. When submerged, these stealthy hunters were almost unstoppable. But above water, they were nearly helpless, particularly vulnerable when taking on supplies or being repaired. Building a bunker to protect a single 250-foot submarine would be a major undertaking. But on the northeastern shores of occupied France, Germany built a submarine bunker complex to house not one, but up to 24 of their U-boats. 3 mammoth block structures comprise the submarine complex in the seaside village of Lorient. Inside these bunkers lay a small city, able to house and protect the submarines, as well as perform repairs and store tons of ammunition, torpedoes, and fuel to supply the underwater killers.
To build this phenomenal structure, they obviously needed a lot of workers. Nearly 15,000 prisoners labored for 2 years to build the base.
Most of the labor went into constructing the roofs of the buildings. The bunker's ceilings were built of steel-reinforced concrete over 10 feet thick to protect against enemy bombs. The third and largest building has 2 roofs, making it nearly impenetrable.
The first ceiling measures 3.5 meters thick and covers the entire building. Then there is an airspace, on top of which there is a second roof which covers approximately 2/3 of the bunker.
The roofs were so well built, they forced the British to develop special 6-ton bunker buster bombs called tallboys. On August 6, 1944, the Royal Air Force scored a direct hit. This 50-foot wide crater on top of the roof is the result of the monstrous blast. But despite the tremendous explosion, the weapon was only able to penetrate a few feet. The roof was so thick, nearly 20 feet of solid reinforced concrete remained intact to protect the facility below. The tallboy at least managed to land on the roof. Most other bombs earmarked for the bunker and the planes carrying them never came close. Over the course of the war, nearly 20,000 German soldiers were assigned to anti-aircraft batteries atop the bunker complex and throughout the surrounding city. Successful attacks by Allied pilots were nearly impossible. Aerial frontal attacks on the bunker were equally difficult. Many of the submarine pens have water-level blast doors that were lowered at the first sign of trouble. The barrier would stop torpedoes and specially designed skipping bombs from literally entering through the front door. For additional protection, the Germans scuttled 2 ships in the harbor. 200 yards from the bunker's entrance, the sunken ships provided an additional barrier to defend against torpedo attacks. The bunkers were impervious to nearly every weapon in the Allied arsenal. Still, they were vulnerable. The Lorient bunkers depended upon a steady stream of goods and materials to operate properly. Once the Allies realized they could not destroy the bunkers outright, they turned to cutting the supply lines. Unfortunately for the French, the bunker supply lines ran directly through the city of Lorient.
60,000 bombes. 60,000 bombs fell on the city and only 70 buildings were left standing in the town center after the war. The whole city had to be rebuilt. Fortunately, the Lorient population was completely evacuated before the bombing started. So on a human level, there were few victims, but on a material level, we lost everything.
Lorient suffered the same devastating fate as many European cities during the war. But unlike Lorient, other cities were rarely able to evacuate beforehand. In London, German bombers showered the city with high explosives and incendiary bombs. The citizens sought refuge underground. Bunkers and hastily converted subway tunnel shelters protected the people while the city above them burned.
The bombs that were raining down on London at that time, and indeed not just London, but practically every major city in the UK, were doing incredible damage. A stick of bombs could devastate a whole area, literally flatten buildings, destroy streets, destroy people's way of life. And you might go down to an underground shelter, maybe a tube shelter, or even just a street shelter, and come out and find your whole street had literally just disappeared.
Disappearing was not an option for the British government, and in particular Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who refused to leave London, worried that his absence would demoralize the British people. But where could high-level British officials take refuge as the bombs fell? The British addressed that question by building a top-secret, high-tech command bunker in the center of London. Converted from a series of small basement storerooms in 1938, the Cabinet War Room served as the underground nerve center from which Churchill and his war cabinet led the fight.
The configuration of the Cabinet War Rooms in 1940 was about 21 rooms, making up about 1,000 square metres. But when it extended in 1941 to 45, it occupied somewhere in the region of about 100 rooms and was literally 3 times as big.
Located under the present-day Treasury building, the bunker is within walking distance of both Parliament and number 10 Downing Street. But it was chosen less for its size and location than for its strength.
The building had a steel frame in it. Steel frame building technology was relatively new or even revolutionary at that time. It wouldn't necessarily stop a bomb, but it would hopefully withstand better if a bomb ever hit it.
Unconcerned with aesthetics, British builders left these exposed steel girders visible in nearly every major room of the bunker. Oak joists shored up the smaller rooms and kept the ceiling from crashing down during bombing raids.
I think the planners knew when it became a headquarters building that it wasn't, properly speaking, bomb-proof. But it was only at the end of 1940, so well into the bombing raids of the Blitz, which started in September of that year, that they finally began to install proper bomb-proofing. And what they put in was a layer of reinforced concrete, and quite the strongest concrete you can imagine, varying in thickness between about 5 and 10 feet, depending what it was covering.
This cutaway in the ceiling reveals the thickness of the concrete as it rests upon the steel girder subframe. But it was not just the strength of this structure that made it such an effective command bunker. Behind this unassuming bathroom door lies one of the greatest technological secrets of the entire war.
The war rooms were really Churchill's